Hi, I'm Ron Spurnberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education.
In this week's episode, we unpack the concept of sustained shared thinking that focuses on active listening and positive questioning as a pedagogical approach. In our conversation with Kathy Brody, an early years consultant based in England, we talk about the importance of having intentional conversations with children that explores interactive dialogue and builds problem-solving skills, rather than focusing on the right answer. We discuss the research that proves the efficacy of the approach and its practical applications in the classroom. Kathy has also authored the book Sustained Shared Thinking as a resource for teachers who are interested in the approach. If you're looking for inspiration on how to have more meaningful conversations in and out of the classroom, then stay tuned for this episode of the Preschool Podcast.
Kathy, welcome to the Preschool Podcast.
Hi, Ron. Thank you very much indeed for having me on. It's a great honor.
So, Kathy, you're the author or co-author of several books related to early childhood education. But because we only have so much time today, we're just going to focus on one of those books, and the topic there being sustained shared thinking in the early years. Can you start off by telling us what sustained shared thinking is?
Of course, Ron, and what a lovely subject to be starting off with as well. Sustained shared thinking are those lovely conversations that you have with children where you're both concentrating, you're both really invested in that conversation, you're both really concentrating on what's happening. It's the sort of conversations that are happening all the time up and down the country right now. And it's those really enjoyable moments. You might go back to the staff room afterwards and sort of say, you'll never guess what he's just told me. And those little conversations that you have, those really in-depth things. Sustained shared thinking does have a formal definition, of course, as well, which I'm just going to run through and then just dissect a little bit so we can understand the thinking behind it. So the formal definition for sustained shared thinking is an episode in which two or more individuals work together in an intellectual way to solve a problem, clarify a concept, evaluate activities, extend a narrative, etc. Both parties must contribute to the thinking and it must develop and extend. And that was the definition that Kathy Silver and her research team gave for sustained shared thinking in 2004. I just want to unpack that just a little bit because there's an awful lot of words in there. So first of all, it's an episode in which two or more individuals work together in an intellectual way. And that's really important, the intellectual part. It's not simply a conversation where you're saying, do you want the red bike? Yes, please, I'll have the red bike. It's more than that. It's working out something together, whatever that might be, in an intellectual way. There's got to be some thinking behind it. And that conversation might be to solve a problem. How are we going to get all these toys out of the shed? It might be to clarify a concept. So why do you think that ice floats on water? What's your thoughts on floating? It might be to evaluate an activity. How can we make this even better? What can we add to this activity to improve it? Or it might be to extend a narrative. So that might be to have a conversation, start with the child and then inquire a little bit more. Do you know a bit more about dinosaurs? Do you know any of the dinosaurs' names? And there's an etc. in the definition. And there's a reason why there's an etc. because it covers so many different things that you couldn't actually define everything, every sort of conversation that you would have. And what that's saying is that it's open-ended, that it's lots and lots of different things. And you might have a piece of sustained shared thinking about something else altogether, and that's fine, even if it's not described in that definition. The second sentence says that both parties must contribute to thinking, it must develop and extend. And by both parties, it usually means adult and child, although I must stress that sustained shared thinking can happen between children as well. You might have a more knowledgeable other. But in this case, taking adult and child, both parties must contribute to the thinking and it must develop and extend. So again, it's not just those really short conversations, it's a really in-depth where you both have to think about something and where you actually come out of it thinking differently than when you went into that conversation. So you can see from all of that that it's actually quite a complex thing that you're doing, even though you've just sat and had a really nice little 5-minute chat in the reading area with your child. You've actually done something quite complex there. Interestingly, when Kathy Silver, when they did the research, they wrote a book afterwards called Early Childhood Matters. And in that book, they detailed how sustained shared thinking as a phrase came about. And one of the things that they said was that they could have called it sustained shared dialogue because it's a dialogue, or sustained shared speech because it's a speech. But they particularly wanted the word thinking in there because it's really important to have that two-way flow of information, that kind of exchange of ideas. And that came out of the research.
And Kathy Silver, why did she embark on this research, do you think? Why did she feel this was an important subject?
Well, it's got a really interesting history. It comes from the EPPE, EPPE, the Effective Provision of Preschool Education project, and that was a massive research project that was done 1997. It was started off government funded, and it was at the time it was the biggest in Europe that was going on, longitudinal study. And when I talk big, it was 3,000 children. They had 6 local authorities, which are like counties. They covered nursery classes, play groups, private daycare, homeschooled, all sorts of different children in all sorts of different circumstances. And they followed those children for 5 years to see what happened. Those children that went to a preschool, how did they develop differently that maybe those that didn't ever attend a preschool? Did it matter what sort of preschool they attended? And the whole idea was really to look at, because at that time in 97, the whole day nursery concept was kind of exploding, and we were encouraged more and more to use day nurseries so parents could go out to work. And I think there was a little bit of concern about we're embarking on this journey. We've got no idea where it's going to take us.
Right.
What is it that we need to know before we get all this massive ball rolling? So that was kind of like the background to the research. And when they disseminated all this information, and they had tons and tons, there was loads of really good findings, but sustained shared thinking was one of the findings that came out of it. And what they found in essence was that if a child went to a quality preschool or a quality setting, whether that was a playgroup or a preschool or a nursery school or whatever, but if they went to a quality setting, then it did make a difference to that child's development. Of course, the problem there is, how do you define quality? And we know that's notoriously difficult. You know, even now when we talk about a quality setting, is that what the government decides is quality? You know, it's really difficult. But one of the things that they defined as quality was, or one of the things that was common to all those settings, was that they all embarked on sustained shared thinking. So it didn't matter whether you were a playgroup, a mums and tots, a nursery school, those practitioners, those teachers were getting down and listening to the children, talking to them, and really spending that time having that sustained shared thinking between themselves and the children. And that was one of the definers of quality for them.
And now, why do you think that quality is associated with sustained shared thinking? Why is this beneficial to improving outcomes for children, for example?
One of the biggest things, of course, is that you can tune into children. You can really understand their thinking processes, because children are thinking the whole time. There's never a time when they're not thinking about something. But we can't see that, obviously. So that dialogue, that sustained shared thinking, gives us a chance to see where their thinking is going, to kind of see inside their heads and understand what their thinking is and what their understanding is. So part of it is tuning into the child, really understanding where they're up to, where we need maybe to help them improve in some way, and also maybe where they're exceeding and we didn't know. So part of it's tuning into the child, but the other part is also we know as adults, that if you spend quality time with people, if you take that time to actually listen to them actively, if you take time to actually get down and ask what they are interested in, then you build up those fantastic relationships. Children become more confident, they have greater self-esteem, and all of those things, all that personal, social, emotional development all starts to click into place. And that sets them up for life. These are life skills that they will then go on to use when they start school. They've got great resilience. We know things are going to go wrong. Life just doesn't run smoothly, but that resilience, that bounce back ability is so important. When things do go wrong, they're able to brush themselves off and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to have another go at that. And that the building up of all that personal, social, emotional development is so important. And sustained shared thinking really supports that. And that's what the research showed as well.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. So, taking a step away from the research and the science and the benefits, let's start to talk a little bit more about sustained shared thinking in practice. So, if I'm an early childhood educator, a preschool teacher, what skills and expertise do I need to initiate, encourage, and facilitate sustained shared thinking in my center or in my classroom?
Mm-hmm. Just taking those one at a time then. To initiate sustained shared thinking. So this is before, when the children are first coming into the classroom maybe, or it's after lunch and you've got an opportunity to spend that bit of time with a child or with a group of children. To initiate it, you need to be able to tune into children. You need to know their interests. You need to understand what it is that's going to light their fire. What is it that's really going to grab their attention? So to initiate it, you need to be on the child's level. Very rarely, although sometimes, but very rarely does sustained shared thinking occur when the practitioner or the teacher says, oh, I've got a great idea, you can come and join my idea. It nearly always happens when a sensitive practitioner or a sensitive teacher gets down to the children and understands what it is that they want to do. So the first thing to initiate it is to tune into the children, and sometimes that actually might mean standing back and just having a little bit of a watch, a little bit of an observe, rather than jumping straight in there and saying, oh, I've got 10 minutes to have a conversation, let's do this now.
Right.
It might actually be that you need to stand back a bit. So that's to initiate it. To encourage sustained shared thinking, the environment needs to be right. And I'm not talking about the physical environment, the tables and chairs. I'm talking about the emotional environment where listening to each other is valued, where every opinion is sincerely listened to, and that's child to child as well. So that's encouraged by the teachers, the whole environment of being able to share our thoughts without fear of ridicule, and supportively, and to sort of, even if it sounds a bit strange at first, to unpick that a little bit and say, well, can you tell me a bit more about that, rather than just dismissing out of hand an opinion or an idea. So that environment needs to be there, and that's between practitioners as well. And where I've seen it work the best is where you've got practitioners talking to each other, you've got teachers saying to each other, how can we solve this problem, and doing it in front of the children so they have it modelled for them, so that they know that adults don't have all the answers all the time, and they can see how to solve those problems, clarify those concepts. And once you've initiated it, encouraged it, facilitating it and encouraging it even more, practitioners need to develop those skills. It's quite tricky to be able to talk to children, blocking everything else out, and really concentrate on what that child is saying and understanding the thinking behind it, because that takes a bit of time as well, just to unravel, whilst you've got, you know, a dozen other children running around you and you're just watching out to make sure nobody falls off the climbing frame and all that sort of thing. So sometimes to facilitate it, you need to maybe have a meeting together with the teachers all together and talk to them and say, you know, this is something that I want to develop in the setting. This is something that I feel would be worthwhile for our classroom. How can we make this happen? And I've seen it work in a number of ways. I've seen teachers who have been ratioed out during the afternoon or during the morning, so they've got time. They don't have to do anything else except chat with the children. I've seen it happen where they have like a signal, they have a hat, or they just put their hand up because this conversation is going on with a child and they don't want it to stop, but something over there needs sorting out. So they just indicate to their partner in the room that, just, can you sort that out because I'm just engaged in this. So really the two halves of the skill set that you need there are active listening and positive questioning, and that's the skill set that you need really for sustained shared thinking.
So one of the things that really strikes me when you speak more about it is it's really intuitive when you talk about it. It's like, okay, that's really obvious. Why, why haven't we been doing this? Why isn't everyone doing this? But it also strikes me that it would be very difficult to implement in practice. And some of the things that you mentioned in terms of ways to facilitate it, you do have to be quite proactive in terms of thinking how you're
Mm-hmm.
going to, work with your educators if you're an administrator or if you're an early childhood educator in the classroom, how you're going to work with your peers to uh, have an environment where you can practice sustained shared thinking. So, what are some of the strategies or tips that you have for educators who want to implement this in their classrooms?
Okay, well, there's a few things really. The first thing is to practice that active listening, and the active listening is all about blocking out those external thoughts, the little thoughts that are going on in the back of your mind. What am I going to have for my tea? I need to go get lunch on, all that sort of thing. But to really be there in the moment, all part of that kind of mindfulness set. With the children and actually really try and understand their thinking. So to practice active listening, and it is a skill you need to practice. As human beings, we spend a lot of time multitasking, and more so. Active listening is about actually being there with that child, what we used to maybe call quality time, but it's actually being there. Let's say the other half of that equation is the positive questioning. So lots of open-ended questions, the sort of the what, where, who, when, and how types. I would urge caution on the why question, because very often if you ask the question why, that can make people, adults and children, very defensive. If I come in and said,
Mm,
why have you done that? It's like, I'm having to justify myself. And
mm-hmm,
children feel like that too. But lots of open-ended questions. Think about the questions that you're asking. Are you just asking a question in order to get an answer, or are you genuinely interested? So if you
mm,
come in and say, what colour is this pencil? You know it's red. The child knows it's red. We know that there's a right and wrong answer. But if you said, what can you tell me about this pencil? Then that child might say it's red, it's sharp, it's long, and you might get a lot more information rather than, yeah, it's red. That's more of the sustain than you need. In terms of actually in the classroom, you've already hit it on the head there. You do need the time, and you need to be able to do it as a group, as a setting. Educators need to get together and understand that sustained shared thinking is so natural. It is happening all the time, but we need to be conscious of it and we need to value it. And one of my big hates is if you go into a setting and they say, oh, yeah, she's just talking with the children. She's not just talking with the children, she's having a brilliant conversation about what they've just built. They're not just, it's got to be valued and possibly recorded as well. The problem with sustained shared thinking is that it is very fleeting, that it is a process, it's not a product. You're not going to walk away with a painting at the end of it necessarily. And it's something that just happens. And unless you're really good at remembering things, it's gone. So to consider how you might capture that, and that might be a piece of video or a piece of audio, or to say to your partner, I just need a couple of minutes to make notes on that because that was a really lovely conversation. I just want to make sure that's recorded. And that all comes part of the valuing sustained shared thinking, really understanding it's part of your pedagogy and what you do in your setting to support children. It's not just chatting with the children. Um, and finally, to encourage children to do it as well with each other to solve problems rather than seeing a problem going on. They're fighting about how they're going to set up the obstacle course and they want it done this way. To actually go in and encourage that negotiation, to solve that problem together, and show children, model to them how to listen to each other and how to negotiate and how to clarify those concepts together. And if you can get the children partaking in sustained shared thinking between themselves, you've got some really strong pedagogy going on there. And if they can constantly question and they constantly thinking, that metacognition that's going on in there, thinking about their thinking, so much the better, because again, that's a life skill that will take them through to school and take them through the whole of their life, that thinking about thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point. The children almost learn by doing sustained shared thinking in the classroom at a very young age, at the sort of preschool level. They learn how to have those deeper, more genuine conversations and relationships with people going forward, I guess, too, right?
Absolutely. If it's encouraged and if they're in the right environment and if they feel secure to do so, I would love to say it happens in every setting, but I know it doesn't. There's still places out there where they feel that what they need to do is to teach children their colours, their numbers, their shapes, their letters, but not to teach them how to query or how to question or how to solve problems. And we know from the research and we know from experience that that's so short term, that when they do hit their first problem or they see
Mhm.
something that's slightly different, they can't solve it because they haven't been given those skills.
And I find that this is also a very timely conversation because one thing that you mentioned, which struck me, was about, active listening and how difficult that is. And
Mm.
with, a lot of the multitasking that everyone's always trying to do because, in the world we're living in, there's so many distractions. We're all very busy. And especially with technology, we're always checking, updates and this and that. And so kind of like sitting down and having those more focused and deeper conversations and purposely spending that time with children and with other people is something that's a very relevant point of conversation in 2017, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And as you say, with technology exploding as it is, and even the youngest children being exposed to screens and things, it is. They need to understand the idea of switching off as much as we do, I think.
Totally, totally. So if somebody wanted to go to learn more about sustained shared thinking, where would they go to find more information?
Okay, so I've got several articles on my website, kathybrody.com, and that talks about the importance of sustained shared thinking and how you can support it. And in some of those, I talk further about active listening and positive questioning and some of those skill sets. And you can get the book Sustained Shared Thinking from Amazon.com or Amazon.co.uk, depending where you are. Or listeners can go on to earlyyearstraining.org.uk, and I've got an online sustained shared thinking course which takes you in much more detail through all those different skill sets and how you can actually implement that in practice. It's a very practical kind of course. And I've got some other courses on there as well if you wanted to have a look at that on early years training. And I'll be very happy to hear from anybody on Twitter. I like Twitter a lot. It's my Twitter is at Kathy Brody, or one word.
Awesome. Kathy, this has been a really great conversation. I think a super interesting topic that is not only timely and very intuitive when you go through the specifics. I think it's something that people can take with them on every journey in their life and on all sorts of conversations and in all their relationships, not just in the classroom but beyond, which I think speaks to the validity and the credibility of this concept of sustained shared thinking. So thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
You're very welcome, Ron. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you about sustained shared thinking today.
What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. How are you?
Hi.
You having fun playing?
Yes.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite thing to play out here?
Swings, monsters,
You like to play monsters? Do you like the swings? Okay. What else you like to do?
play my door bike.
Oh, with your Dora bike? Oh, okay. Do you ride fast?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.